On the 23rd of February 1945, Easy Company of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment left their frontline positions in the French city of Hagenau and were placed in reserve, followed by the rest of the 101st Airborne Division 3 days later. As it would turn out, the division's time in Hagenau was its last major combat action of the Second World War. Dick Winters later recalled that after Hagenau, we all started walking with more care, with eyes in the back of our heads, making sure we didn't get knocked off. You suddenly had a gut feeling, by God, I believe I'm going to make it. Easy Company and the 101st would eventually end the war drinking Hermann Göring's wine at the Führer's Bavarian holiday home in Berchtesgaden. Unbeknownst to the men of the 101st, there had been a mission planned for them after Hagenau which, had it been carried out, would have been the largest airborne operation in military history. While in reserve, the 101st Paratroopers and their veteran comrades in the 1st Allied Airborne Army underwent rigorous training for an assault on Berlin, the capital of the Third Reich. This is the story of Operation Eclipse II, one of the most ambitious yet unrealised plans of the Second World War. This video is sponsored by War Thunder, a free-to-play military vehicle online combat game. Simply download free and play cross-platform on PC, Xbox Series X and S, PlayStation 5, and the previous console generation. Take command of a vast fleet of more than 2,000 historically accurate playable tanks, aircraft, helicopters and ships from the 1920s to the present day, against more than 50 million global players in exciting combat-armed battles. Enjoy great graphics, authentic sound effects and realistic physics and damage models. Instead of general hit points, vehicles suffer damage to their components that affect their fighting ability. I've been playing War Thunder since 2015 and still love jumping in a Spitfire and doing battle with some mates. Follow the link to get a large free bonus pack, premium account and vehicles, boosters and more. First, it is important to differentiate this plan from a later Operation Eclipse, which was launched on the 2nd of March 1945, at the twilight of the war in Europe. That operation saw British and Canadian forces race east, deep behind enemy lines in order to liberate northern Germany and Denmark before the advancing Red Army. Eclipse II was a far more ambitious plan, which had its origins in November of 1944. With the Western Allies threatening the Rhine River and the Soviet Union pushing west through Poland, the collapse of Germany was seen as just a matter of time. The failed assassination of the Führer in the 20th of July plot also convinced many in the Allied ranks that the Nazi state was about to fall like a house of cards. Unaware of the impending German winter offensive, which would become known as the Battle of the Bulge, Allied High Command decided to formulate contingencies in the event that enemy resistance collapsed completely. The commander of the 1st Allied Airborne Army, Lieutenant General Louis Brereton, authorised his staff to draw up plans for an airborne assault on Berlin. The basic idea called for British, American, Canadian and Polish paratroopers to drop in and around the Reich's capital, which was expected to be lightly defended. The initial plan rested upon the downfall of the Nazi government, upon which the 1st Allied Airborne Army would restore order in Berlin. If an assassination attempt on the Führer succeeded, the paratroopers would be expected to seize authority in the capital before the Red Army arrived. However, the Battle of the Bulge altered the thinking behind the operation. Realising that Germany was still capable of putting up a fight, Eclipse II was reworked to account for enemy resistance in the capital. While sources vary on exact numbers and what the final iteration of the plan looked like, the most basic scenario prior to the breakout from the Rhine River was as follows. Operation Eclipse II was to be a daytime operation, requiring elements of 5 airborne divisions with 1 infantry division in reserve. The expected D-Day was to be sometime in the spring of 1945, and to take place in conjunction with the Allied armies charging out of their Rhine bridgeheads. Prior to the assault, Berlin was to be pounded by Allied air forces. Although this cannot be verified, this aerial barrage was said to have involved RAF Mosquitoes saturating suspected German defences with napalm, while Lancasters would target the imposing Berlin flag towers with enormous 12,000-pound tallboy bombs. Following the barrage, 3 divisions and the Polish 1st Parachute Brigade would be airlifted to the capital itself. The bulk of the American 82nd Airborne Division under the command of Major General Jim Gavin would be dropped over the primary target of Tempelhof Airport south of the centre of Berlin. They would secure the airport, while other 82nd Airborne units would capture the secondary objective of Rangsdorf Airfield. The 101st Airborne was tasked with capturing Gatow and Stoughton airfields to the west of the city, just across the Havel River. The last targets in Berlin would be left to Major General Roy Urquhart's British 1st Airborne Division, along with the Polish Brigade. They were to assault and capture the airfields at Tegel and Oranienburg, to the northwest of the city. Far to the west, at the town of Wesel on the Rhine, a brigade with elements from the British 6th Airborne and American 17th Airborne Divisions would land to support Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's breakout from the Rhine bridgehead seized during Operation Plunder. Montgomery's 21st Army Group would race across the North German plain to link up with the airborne forces in Berlin within 3 days. During those crucial days, the paratroopers were expected to hold their landing zones, while the reserve British 52nd Lowland Division would be airlifted into the city to reinforce the men on the ground. If everything went according to plan, the Western Allies would secure the Reich's capital in a week. The logistics for such an operation would have been staggering. At a minimum, Eclipse II required 1,500 transport aircraft, 20,000 paratroopers, 3,000 fighters and fighter bombers, and 1,000 gliders. By comparison, Operation Market Garden saw a combined 3,600 fighters, gliders and transports take part in what had been the largest airborne operation in history to that point. Needless to say, this undertaking would have constituted one of the most ambitious military operations of the 20th century. Planning for the airborne drop was aided by intelligence gathered by the German resistance. Members of the Reichsbahner, an underground group comprised mostly of anti-Nazi World War I veterans, began scouting possible landing zones around Berlin in expectation for an airborne assault. In concert with Allied intelligence, they identified the Schlachsensee and Warnsee lakes as landmarks to guide the transports to their drop zones. Once the paratroopers had landed, Reichsbahner members would guide the airborne infantry past enemy defences and into the city, where they would set up their headquarters at an office building secured by the resistance. It is unclear how deeply the Reichsbahner and Allied intelligence coordinated on Operation Eclipse II, but there is evidence that the German resistance movement in Berlin was prepared for an airborne landing near the end of the war. On the 24th of March 1945, the British 6th and American 17th Airborne Divisions took part in Operation Varsity, the largest airborne operation yet. This was to aid Montgomery's crossing of the Rhine as part of Operation Plunder. The next night, the commanders of the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, along with the British 1st Airborne Corps, were briefed for the first time on Operation Eclipse II. The timing of the assault was left vague, while Allied High Command monitored the results of Operation Plunder. However, the 101st Airborne's Chief Planning Officer, Colonel Harry Kinnard, believed the Allied paratrooper divisions could be ready to drop on Berlin within 5 hours if they had the proper transport. Both American divisions immediately began dress rehearsal drills under the strictest security. Most concluded this rigorous training was for an eventual invasion of Japan, but some suspected Berlin. One paratrooper in the 505th Regiment of the 82nd Airborne joked, "They want to get their money's worth. They ain't gonna waste me on Berlin. Hell no, they're saving me up. They're gonna drop me on Tokyo." Planning for the operation was well underway when Captain Arie Bestebrugge of the Royal Netherlands Army was summoned to the 82nd Airborne's headquarters to meet with General Gavin. Captain Bestebrugge had been the Dutch Army's liaison officer with the 82nd during Operation Market Garden, but more importantly for the operation at hand, he had been a spy in Berlin early in the war. General Gavin stood in front of a map of Berlin and briefed Bestebrugge and his subordinates on Eclipse II, telling them, "Gentlemen, we're going in for the kill. This is the Sunday punch." The Dutch captain impressed upon the general the difficulty of this task, as Tempelhof was the target closest to the centre of the city, and the surrounding neighbourhoods could be turned into fortresses by German defenders. Despite this concern, Captain Besterbrugge concluded, "It will be worth it, and I'm proud to be going with you. My friends, when we take Berlin, the war is over." Supreme Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower would have to make the ultimate choice on whether to carry out Operation Eclipse II. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill supported the plan, along with Field Marshal Montgomery, whose troops would make the dash from the Rhine to Berlin. Churchill was suspicious of Soviet intentions and wanted the Western Allies to liberate as much of Europe as possible. Montgomery found an unlikely ally in this regard, as General Patton also urged for Eclipse II to be approved. Despite a deep loathing of the British Field Marshal, Patton believed Montgomery's 21st Army Group was best positioned to reach the city before the Soviets. However, political considerations cast a shadow on the operation. At the Yalta Conference in February of 1945, the United States, United Kingdom, and Soviet Union had agreed on the post-war borders and occupation zones of a defeated Germany. Berlin, and most of the country east of the Elbe River, was within Soviet occupation zone, meaning any Western Allied advance past the Elbe would eventually be withdrawn. Furthermore, Eisenhower was skeptical that Berlin was worth spending extra lives and effort when the war was already winding down. Eisenhower consulted 12th Army Group Commander General Omar Bradley, who agreed with his thinking. "I think it will cost us 100,000 casualties to capture Berlin, a pretty stiff price for a prestige objective, especially when President Roosevelt has already conceded the eastern region of Germany to the Soviets." The two men were also concerned that Nazi Germany's remaining forces would retreat to the Alpenfestung, or Alpine fortress in the south of the country, where they could hold out in the rugged terrain of the Alps. While the Alpenfestung would end up being more of a propaganda tool for the Nazis, the Allies were concerned about a protracted resistance forming in southern Germany and Austria. Incredibly, the Soviet High Command was entirely aware of this planned operation. Soviet leader Joseph Stalin had become increasingly paranoid that the Western Allies would sign a separate peace with the Germans, and ordered his spies to uncover their plans for Berlin. On the 31st of March, with the Red Army 16 days away from launching their own ground assault on the German capital, Stalin ordered Marshals Zhukov and Konev to the Kremlin. He informed them, 2 Allied airborne divisions are being rapidly readied for a drop on Berlin, before sharing full details of the plan. He ended, "So, who will take Berlin, we or the Allies?" Stalin was determined not to let what Soviet soldiers referred to as the lair of the fascist beast escape his vengeance. The Red Army's Berlin operation was rewritten to ensure Soviet forces would encircle the capital in order to prevent the Western Allies from reaching the real prize. In the end, Stalin would get his way when on the 14th of April, Eisenhower officially ordered the Allied spearheads to halt once they reached the Elbe River. He ultimately decided the risk was too great and the reward too small. The decision to abandon the race for Berlin was a bitter pill to swallow for many. On the morning of the 15th of April, the spearhead of General Bill Simpson's 9th Army was less than 100 miles from Berlin when General Bradley ordered Simpson to halt. "Where in the hell did you get this?" Simpson asked. "From Ike," Bradley answered. A shocked and disappointed Simpson could only shake his head silently. The capital of the Third Reich officially fell on the 2nd of May 1945, and World War II in Europe came to an end a week later. By this time, the 101st Airborne had been enjoying their mini-holiday in Berchtesgaden when they learned the war had ended. It would take years for many of the paratroopers to learn that they had originally been earmarked for a far more dangerous mission to win the war. Despite missing out on the prestige which would have followed a victory in Berlin, most men were simply content to be done with the fighting. As Winters himself wrote in his autobiography, World War II ended about as gloriously as I had ever hoped. Berchtesgaden was really the heart of Germany, not Berlin. As such, Operation Eclipse II remains one of the most fascinating what-ifs of the Second World War. An ambitious plan which would have given American, British, Canadian and Polish paratroopers one last chance to prove themselves worthy of their reputation as elite warriors. Play War Thunder for free on PC, PS5 and Xbox Series X and S. Follow the link to get a large free bonus pack, premium account and vehicles, boosters and more.